Hello, Dr. Vince Garland and the rest of the EXE 620 classmates. My name is Kasha Bayless, and I'm doing my video on the ADA checklist to see if a specific building is handicap accessible and meets the code according to this checklist. I chose to do the school/church, private school/church that I went to high school, elementary, and I was raised in. My parents still attend, and it is located in a small town called Yorkshire, New York, from a very rural area. It was a very, very small school. I had about 30 kids in my high school and graduated with about 11. Very, very, very small. And I find sometimes that when I'm out here, there's not very frequent there's not a lot of accessibility, not as much as I see up in the city. So I was interested. I wanted to see how everything worked. So I got a little bit of history on the building. It was first built in the 80s, and it was reconstructed in 2005 to add on a church building. The gymnasium stayed the way that it was, and a couple classroom buildings also stayed. And then they added another building portion that would house high school, some of the high school, middle school, and elementary below it. So my dad and I went, he measured for me, and I had the checklist, and we went through each priority. We measured all sorts of stuff, and so I wanted to report what I found. Priority 1, accessible approach and entrance. I was very impressed. The entrances are all handicap accessible. The caveat with that is that they each go to a different part of the building. So if you were a student in high school and you needed wheelchair accessibility to get to the upstairs, you would have to take a ramp and an entrance to get to those classrooms. But then if you needed to go to the original classrooms or the gymnasium, you'd have to go outside of the parking lot to go into that door. But it is accessible all the way around. There is a ramp that leads to the upstairs of the high school classroom area. The only recommendation I had for that door was that it was very, very heavy. It did not pass the closed fist test. And so I recommend that perhaps they would get a button that would automatically open the door for the person and make it far more independent access. I would recommend that for all of the doors. That was one of my big suggestions, was put in an automatic door opener. Apart from that, there were plenty of handicap spaces in the parking lot, especially with how many spaces they have. There were actually far more handicap spaces than the ratio that was in the checklist required. So that was impressive. The recommendation I had there was that 2 of the spots, the handicap paint had been stripped away, or it's just gone from rain or weathering or whatever it may be. So I recommend that they make sure that those are well known, that those are spaces that a handicap van can park. There's plenty of space around them. Also, there's nobody that really enforces the rules for handicap parking, whether at church or school. So I said perhaps that would be another good recommendation, that somebody is at least checking to make sure that somebody's not being a wise guy. All right, for priority 2, access to goods and services. This was another area that impressed me. All along the inside, especially for the new parts of the building, there are plenty of ramps. Each ramp had a railing. There was a few places where I would recommend putting railings, especially for the ramp taking you from the high school down to the elementary portion. There are plenty of staircases, but there is one ramp, and it is not slip resistant. It's all tile, so I recommend that perhaps they put some compliant mats there, or something that would make it less slippery. Also, railings would be important there. Apart from that, the drinking fountains would be in priority 4, but everything was accessible. From telephones to drinking fountains. The doors were not heavy. They all passed the fist test, the closed fist test. Not heavy at all. The carpets are very tight, so there's not much room for tripping or anything. Everything was truly very compliant as far as that was concerned. The access to the restrooms was my personal favorite to do because this did differ depending on the part of the building that we were in. So the church part was it was good. It was very compliant. It was the same as the new building that they put in, which I thought was interesting. So those 2 sets of bathrooms, everything was compliant from space to closed door. Everything there was good. The only thing that was hard to reach was the soap. The soap was all the way pushed to the far side of behind the sink, which I think would be kind of tough to reach for. So I recommend that maybe that was just placed next to the sink, and there you go, that's taken care of. There was one part that I forgot to mention in priority 2 with goods and services, and this does correlate with the restrooms as well. There is no braille. There are no pictures. The only thing that specifies bathrooms is a sign that says men and a sign that says women. In the church part, which is, again, a newer portion, there is one picture. I believe it shows the girl in the skirt and the guy with the pants. But there is no braille that specifies gymnasium, library, daycare, classroom 1, classroom 2, nothing like that, which I think would be very important for them to get in. So that was one of my suggestions. And again, the restrooms were very good for the newer portions. The old portion, though, the restrooms were not compliant. The sink was far too high. That was maybe one of the only things about that, was that the sink was not compliant, and the drinking fountain in the older portion was also not compliant. So perhaps changing those would be beneficial. But apart from that, I was very impressed. To summarize, everything was pretty much compliant. There are just a few tweaks that they could use, and I will probably pass this along to the pastor, just because I always push for inclusion in their school, and it would be wonderful if they would get some students with disabilities and make it accessible for everybody. So thank you. That's all.